Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here, and I want to make a video talking about what I would want from a potential Fire Emblem The Binding Blade remake. So, in Fire Emblem discourse currently, the big talk is on a Genealogy of the Holy War remake, and I think for good reason, but I don't think Binding Blade should be overlooked. Even if it's not the next remake, even if the next, Fire Emblem game or Fire Emblem remake is Genealogy of the Holy War, Binding Blade could still come at a later point. And there's also a good chance they could skip by the Binding Blade. They might come back to it later, but for one, there is precedence for this. They remade Fire Emblem 1, then 3 before going back to 2, so they could do the same thing again, go remake 6, then go back to 4. There's also the fact that Genealogy of the Holy War has some questionable content as to how it would be localized and handled, whereas conversely, Binding Blade, not really. So there's also just the fact that Roy himself is a popular character thanks to his appearance in Smash Brothers. He has more recognizability than, say, Sigurd. So with that, I just want to talk about a few of the things I would suggest the remake doing or things I would like to see. So starting off, just some miscellaneous minor changes. For one, I would give Marcus D rank in Axis instead of E rank. This would make Chapter 4 with the Nomads so much easier. Generally, what I like to do when I play Binding Blade is just spend chapters like 2 and or 3 just grinding up Marcus's axe rank to get D rank so he can use the halberd in Chapter 4. And that really doesn't have any sort of place in LTC or even like any sort of efficient setting, but it does make things so much easier. I think that would be a much welcome change. We just start with D axes in default, so if you really want that, you don't have to grind for it. And if you're playing efficiently, you still get that option to have Marcus use the halberd on the Nomads in Chapter 4. Another thing I would add would just be more opportunities for promotion. I think they would handle it kind of how like Shadow Dragon and New Mystery of the Emblem handled it, where originally I get why there's differing promotional items like Nightcrest, Ryan's Bolt, Elysian Whip, Hero's Crest, etc. They want to, promote having encourage having a diverse team. But just in practice, like especially Binding Blade, you get one Night Crest in a reasonable time, like Chapter 8, and the next one doesn't come until like the end of Chapter 15. So what most players or a lot of players end up doing is they train Lance and Alan, and then whichever one gets better level ups, they use the Night Crest on them. The other one becomes like a support pod at best, or they just drop them. I think they could do that, or just add in more promotional items. Probably go with the former though. And lastly, just have like miscellaneous minor changes. I'd want the ability to use items in the preparation screen. So this is something that more modern games do. But like, let's say you're about to send out Lena, you have promoted Lena. She has like a heal staff, a vulnerable area, thunder tome, a fire tome. But you also just got some stat boosting items, maybe a speed wing, maybe a seraph robe. You want to use that on her. That limits her inventory. She can't carry along something like, say, 4 Blaze. And also, even ignoring that, at the very start of the map, if you want to have her do something, she can't use an item and like attack or heal at the same turn. Sometimes, at least for me, I end up like forgetting about it, and I like send in like a promotional item or stat boosting item, and they'll care for the entire map. And I've realized the next map's, oh, I forgot to use that. That might just be me, but it's a minor change, but I think it would go a long way. All right, next we have the ability to freely choose route splits. There are 2 big route splits in the game. One of them is pretty easy. You just choose a house during Chapter 9. They could just change that to don't matter which house you choose, you just manually choose which web place you want to go at the end of the chapter. The big one is the Ilya Sakai split. So if Shanna and Thea have equal to or more experience than Sue and Shin, you go to the Ilya route. Conversely, if Sue and Shin combined have gained more experience than Shanna and Thea, you go to the Sakai route. It's not the most difficult thing in the world to kind of choose your route, but I think it would just be better at the end of Chapter 16 or 16X. You just choose, hey, do you want to go to Ilya or Sakai? Little text box appears. kind of like, say, like the route split from Sacred Stones, Erika or Ephraim route. So there are situations where you might want to go to Ilia, but you still want to use Sue and especially Shin on like hard mode because they're good units, especially like I said, Shin with the hard mode bonuses. But if you want to go to Ilia, you kind of have to hold them back a little bit from the max potential, and or you might want to use Shanna and Thea more than you initially planned. And of course, the inverse is going to be true if you want to go to Sakai. You kind of have to limit how much you use the flyers, which is easier, but it's still something to bear in mind. And you do have to put maybe slightly more investment than you originally planned for one or both of these two. I just think just choosing the route would be better overall. Next, I have Blazing Blade cameos and or references. So this could pave the way if they remake Binding Blade to potentially remake Blazing Blade as well later down the line. That is a game that has had an official English release. It's even like currently available on the Nintendo Switch Online. But just because the game has been officially released in the West, they could still make a remake of it. It is like fairly popular among the Fire Emblem community. So a few ways they could go about this, like Project Ember, I believe, had Lowen as a playable character. That's something they could do. Kanas, even if they don't like retcon him like dying in a snowstorm, they could at least explicitly mention him by name or that sort of thing. Pint and Luis, I believe they're still alive at the time of this game. They're just not explicitly mentioned by name. You could at the very least mention them, or since they're still alive, unlike Kanas, they could show up maybe like in a supporting role or something. Just small things like that, I think, would be a nice, people who played Blazing Blade, they appreciate the reference. People who haven't, they might be excited to play a potential Blazing Blade remake, or at the very least, play Blazing Blade like on Nintendo Switch Online. I do think there's only so much they can really do with it. Like, I don't think intelligent systems would want to confirm or deconfirm canon pairings. So I don't think we'll get explicit confirmation, like did Eloy end up with Ninian or with Lyn or what happened to Lyn, but there are a few things you could do with this. Next, I have slightly increased hit rates. Binding Blade is infamous for just having very low hit rates. I remember there was one time I put a unit in like range of the boss. He missed the boss 3 times in a row. In exchange, the boss missed him 3 times in a row for like 3 turns. It was just miss, 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 miss. That's kind of the true, Binding Blade experience. The first, most obvious thing they could do is just have each weapon grant slightly more hits, like swords, axes, lances, bows. Just give them some arbitrary increase in hit. That's definitely an option they can do, or rather, or they could do things that tend to benefit the player more, such as thrones. Instead of granting 30 avoid like they do in the Binding Blade, they could do just 20 avoid as they do in later games. This would make, like, say, fighting Henning in Chapter 8X a little bit more bearable. They could also just, in the weapon triangle, they could just make that more dramatic increases and decreases to hit and avoid, since generally speaking, the weapon triangle is something the player has control over with, like, their paladins switching between different weapons, that sort of thing. I think especially that latter one, the ones that are more player focused, would be better. But they could also do they could just do that, or they could just do increased hit rates of all weapons, or they could do both. Either way, I just want to see a bit more reliability that the player has at their disposal. Next, I have speeding up supports. Another thing Binding Blade is kind of infamous for is very slow supports. Generally, throughout the whole course of the game, you might see like 1, maybe 2, like A rank supports. Aside from Roy and Lelinas, who have a very like fast support with each other, pretty much all of them are very slow. I think the first time I played Binding Blade, other than Lelina and Roy, the only A support I saw was from Lance and Allen, and even then they only got it at like one of the very last chapters. Like, even characters who join later, so you think, oh, they have less maps to be deployed on, so they're not going to have like as high as like support threshold. But sometimes that isn't always the case, and the supports are really good. They grant hit, so that's very good to have in Binding Blade. It can grant avoid, slight increase to attack, slight increase to defense, even like crit avoid or crit rate. Such as, Clarine and Rutger, I think they have a support, which combined with other factors, you can have Rutger having like over 100% crit. It's insane. So what a lot of players end up doing is they defeat all the enemies, they get Roy within Season Rage, and then they just like spam in turn for until you reach turn like 50 or so. It's something you can do, but it's just kind of annoying. Would be better if you just got maybe not maybe not all of them to the extent to say like Roy or Lena, but just generally being able to see more supports throughout the game naturally without spamming in turn. It would help gaining important tools, just making your units better, and you'd also get to see some of the units' characters more. I don't know if they would still keep it so you're like locked at 5 supports per character, like 1A support, 1B support, or 2B supports and 1C support. I would imagine so, because otherwise they might be a little too strong, or they have to like tone back on how good the supports are, like how much bonuses they give. But just speeding up the supports helps gameplay and story, or characters rather. Next thing I have on here is toning down enemy reinforcements. This has pretty much always been my stance. I think Binding Blade has the worst enemy reinforcements in the entire series, like just the ambush spawns, enemies that attack on the same turn they spawn. Other people might disagree. They point to games like New Mystery of the Emblem, Awakening, Three Houses. Those games all have their fair share of ambush spawns, don't get me wrong, but for one, those ambush spawns only happen on higher difficulty layers. You can just play on normal mode or even like hard mode in some cases, and you just ignore them altogether. But even ignoring that, those games give you something to help deal with enemy reinforcements better than Binding Blade. Awakening has overpowered mechanics like the pair-up system, Nosferatu tanking, Gale Force. You can just spend like 1 or 2 turns clearing the map. New Mystery of the Emblem has those mid-map save points, so you can kind of just save and kind of experiment to see what works. Three Houses gives you rewind. And there are other games, especially before Binding Blade, where enemy reinforcements were a problem. But like, say, Thracia 776, like that enemy reinforcement that comes with a slim sword, that's not dealing as much damage, or isn't nearly as problematic as Rutger coming at you with like a killing edge and killing Marcus or something like that. They do give you text warnings, like sometimes in Binding Blade, like saying, hey, enemy reinforcements are coming, but there's only so much you can do with that. Like in Chapter 4, you know enemy reinforcements are coming, but they're coming from the point you're trying to advance on, to seize. And you don't know when Rutger comes out, he moves like 2 or 3 spaces of his own accord, and then uses his full movement of like 5 or 6. So it's still pretty problematic. I would just have the enemy reinforcements. They don't attack on the same turn they spawn. They spawn, and then you have a chance to prepare, and they'll move and attack on the next turn. Or at the very least, they could do something like, if they want to be authentic to the original, because I kind of get the ambush spawns, they're kind of part of the Binding Blade experience. It could be difficulty settings, either like just a standard normal or hard. Normal, enemy reinforcements don't attack on the same turn they spawn. Hard mode, they do. Or if they had like more detailed difficulty options, like say Persona 4 Golden, you could just choose that as one of the options. Either way, Binding Blades and reinforcements are probably my least favorite aspect, or my most disliked aspect of the entire game. Alright, next I have reworking the legendary weapons. In order to get the game's true ending, you have to collect every legendary weapon, and they have to remain intact. They have to have at least one use remaining. If you have one use remaining, then you use it, it just disintegrates, and then you don't get the good ending. There are a few different ways you could change this. One would just be, I think, like increasing the number of times it can be used, maybe something from like 20 uses, barely get a chance to use it, to like 30 uses. Or they could just do something like the legendary weapons have unique properties compared to other weapons, where it's like you can use them 5 or 10 times like per map. And once you reach that point, they break, but they don't disintegrate. So, and then the next map, they have their 5 or 10 uses again. Then once you get to like end game or like the last few chapters, like part of the unlocking the true ending, their usage gets doubled, going from 5 to 10 to like 10 to 20. Because like the legendary weapons, they're already held back by such a high weapon rank. Not every character can. You're not always going to have a character that can use them. So there's that. I don't think it would be too problematic if you had like more uses of them. At the very least, I would just want them to have it so once the legendary weapon breaks, it goes like Genealogy of the Holy War, Thracius 776, which just gets a broken Armades, a broken Durandal, and it doesn't disintegrate. So even just with that broken one, you still can unlock the true ending. And maybe like if it's broken, it gets reworked. It gets restored for like the end game. Maybe it's like they have 20 uses. If they hit 0, they break. But once you reach the last few chapters, they get every weapon. If it has 2 uses left or it's broken, it gets restored to 20. That would help getting unlocking the true ending better, and you would have like more opportunities to use them in the last few chapters. I also think the Binding Blade in particular should just have unlimited uses, like the Ragnall in the Telius games. You get that weapon so late, and Roy's just been like a sitting duck for so long. Giving that weapon infinite use, it's not going to break the game. Generally, what I like to do in playing Binding Blade is just use the Hermern staff on the Binding Blade in like the last few chapters, so Roy can just go ham. I know that's probably not the most optimal way to play. That would probably be using the Hermern staff on the Warp staff, but it's what I like to do, and just giving Roy like a lucky break after he's been bad for so long. I don't think it would be problematic. Speaking of the legendary weapons, that's a nice segue into the next point, which would be give hints for the guide and chapter requirements and slightly alter a few of them. So what I'm thinking is like for chapter 8, in order to get 8x, all you have to do is Lena survive. Just have a text dialogue that says like Lena probably knows something like a hidden passage in this area, which we really need to like get her out of here. And that lets the player know you need to have Lelina survive the chapter. Chapter 12, it has like that term requirement, like 20 or 25. Just have the prince character that's like a bard or something. Just let them know enemy reinforcements are coming. They're going to like destroy hidden temple, but if you get me to the end and like quickly, I can show you like hidden passage. Then just like 5 or so turns before they like arrive, just give a hint like, okay, we really need to hurry, push along, that sort of thing. Chapter 14, just like, okay, we need to get Sophia to the end. She knows about this area, Arcadia. Chapter 16, so we really need to keep Douglas alive. I know he's charging at us, but we keep him alive. I think we can get some information out of him. Then we get to chapters like 20 and 21. I would just change it so you don't need to have characters like that you previously acquired alive for that. Like the Ilia route, all you need to do is keep Juno alive. If you've got Zealot or Zerat or Zealot or Jarrett or Zealot, he's had a few names. If you get him killed earlier, it's no big deal. You can still get that good ending requirement. Just get Juno alive. Same thing for the Sakai ending. All you need to do is keep Dayan alive. And if Sue or Shin bit the dust, you can still get that legendary weapon. I don't know how they would do it for chapter 21. Maybe just the turn requirement, or maybe like something else in that chapter specifically you need to do. But that's just my general thing. It would make it more accessible without having to look up a guide for good ending requirements. Next I have on here is flesh out Roy's character. Roy's character in the Binding Blade, it's not bad. I don't dislike it, but at the same time, there's not really anything to go off of either. Nothing to particularly like or stand out. He's really just kind of Marth 2.0. I think there's 2 ways they could go about this: the funny way and the more practical and realistic way. The funny way would just be like embrace his like awkward zombie persona, like pictured here, which is this wild kind of goofball character. I think that'd be a little too memey to like actually do, but it would be funny. The second, more realistic way would be Binding Blade kind of portrays Roy as like this character of high intellect and cunning, like he left school or just be caught in the war, but it's really more of an informed attribute rather than something we like explicitly see. I think the closest we ever see to that is he kind of guesses that he kind of deduces that Elfin based on his like speech and like upbringing that he's secretly like a prince rather than just like a wandering bard, but that's about it. We just gave more opportunities where like Roy escaped opponents, where he's like outmatched or like tricked his opponents, or like tricked the give it information, like things like that. I think that would go a long way to making Roy stand out among the Fire Emblem lords. And that's a nice segue to the final point about Roy is to I want to slightly buff him. So I think having a weak lord, it does do a few things both for like story and gameplay. Like if you look at the story, Roy's just this character. He got caught up in this war he had no business in being in. He's just leading it in his father's stead because his father Eliwood fell ill, and he had to like leave his school studies. So he's not well suited for war. Characters and his supports kind of point this out. I think it's like a support with like Lance, where Lance shows worry about Roy. Like he really shouldn't be in the front lines. We're always like, no, I have to be in the front lines to like inspire and lead my army. And it's not something I'd want to see in like more games or every game, like that sort of thing. But it is sort of unique having a main character who really truly relies on the other units for combat because his base stats and growth leave a lot to be desired. I do think like everyone who's played Binding Blade makes jokes about how bad Roy is. He's not as bad as others make him out to be, like including myself. Like I have made jokes about Roy being terrible, and I will again, but it's exaggeration. He's not the worst thing ever. He's still pretty bad though. So I would want to slightly buff Roy to make the gameplay just a little bit smoother, but not too much. You boost it too much, you lose part of what makes Binding Blade unique in its gameplay, and it kind of messes with the gameplay story integration. So for those reasons, I'd still keep him footlocked, sword locked, keep the base stats the same, keep his growth rates the same. I would change a few things. One is, like I mentioned previously, the titular Binding Blade. Just make that like the Regale, have it infinite uses. It comes in so late, it's not going to drastically change or break the game. Second would be Roy would promote like at the end of chapter 16 or 16X. He still has a forced story promotion, but doesn't happen at the same time he gets the Binding Blade. So his character growth, it's not all instantaneous. Like as soon as he gets the Binding Blade, he promotes. He gains like base stat. He gains some stats there. He has more time to grow, so he's not just like stuck at like cat level 20 for a while. We moved like by moving that earlier. He starts out, he grows, then he promotes, then he gets the Binding Blade. So, like I said, his character quote unquote development doesn't happen all at once. And lastly, I would just buff his movement by 1. So instead of unpromoted 5 movement, then promoted 6, it would be unpromoted 6 movement, promoted 7. That's what I would do. There is an alternate thing I could do depending on if they add in personal skills. If the game adds in personal skills and I got to decide Roy's, I'd still keep the Binding Blade having infinite uses. I'd still give him like his promotion earlier, right before chapter 17. I wouldn't buff his movement. Instead, I would just give his personal skill be something like moral support. And its effect would basically just be when a unit rescues this character, that unit does not suffer stat penalties, which would make Roy feel a lot less like a liability than an asset, because he's kind of has a joke for being like Backpack Lord. So a unit rescuing Roy, not suffering speed and skill penalties, it would be really funny and be a nod to like how bad he was in the first game. And it wouldn't really it wouldn't buff him too much because he's still bad. Like you're still not going to use him on the front lines too much, but he's not an active liability. It would be funny, and I think it would be practical. All right, those are the things I would change in a potential Binding Blade remake. Questions, comments, rude or snidey remarks, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. This is Enigmatic Mr. L signing out.